If your reality does not change, it is because your mind continues to obey laws you were never taught how to use. What you call destiny is merely unconscious repetition, and it ends when mental alchemy begins. Listen to 1 hour of Thoth and your reality changes, because Hermetic mental alchemy is not belief. It is direct operation upon the soul and true identity, applying the 7 Hermetic Laws as living mechanisms of consciousness, not as dead theory. Mental alchemy begins with mentalism, because as long as you do not assume that reality is lived in the mind, the soul remains captive to false identity. The practical application is direct and emotional. Everything that affects you is observed as a mental phenomenon before becoming reaction, and this simple gesture breaks the spiritual blindness that sustains the matrix of automatism. When you perceive the impulse to react, you pause, feel the body, recognize the thought as an event, not as truth, and this initial separation already shifts your experience of reality. Applying mentalism requires emotional courage, because the psychological ego resists losing the role of victim. In daily practice, you ask yourself, what mental state is creating this now? And sustain attention until the pattern is perceived. This activates the nous, the silent intellect, and allows the logos to organize perception. Reality begins to change because chaos no longer finds internal fuel. The training of mentalism is constant. Thoughts are seen, not followed. Emotions are felt, not narrated. Each time you do not identify, true identity gains space. This process generates metanoia, a profound change of perspective, because the mind ceases to be the master and becomes an instrument. External life responds with less conflict, not by magic, but by the absence of automatic reaction. The depth of mentalism appears when you observe desires and fears without trying to correct them. By allowing them to arise, catharsis occurs, inner purification. The veil of illusion thins because you perceive that you are not the content of the mind. Emotionally, this is uncomfortable, but it is the sign that Osaya, the true essence of being, begins to emerge. Persisting in this practice creates stasis, conscious stillness in the midst of movement. You act when necessary, but you are not dragged along. This stability generates apatheia, inner sovereignty. Reality changes because decisions now arise from clarity, not impulse. Relationships work and choices reorganize themselves around this lucidity. Applied mentalism also reveals the mental prison created by habits. When you see the habit arising, you do not fight it, you simply observe it. This continuous observation dissolves the strength of the pattern. Mechanical life loses intensity, and real awakening ceases to be a concept and becomes daily experience. The practice deepens when you maintain attention on the now during simple tasks. This transforms daily life into an alchemical laboratory. Each moment becomes raw material, the mind becomes clear, and this clarity is reflected in concrete results because you stop sabotaging your own reality. When mentalism stabilizes, force arises, an inner light of lucidity. It is not ecstasy, it is continuous clarity. This light allows you to see the false identity trying to regain control. By seeing it, you do not fully fall back. This is the point where reality begins to be rewritten from the inside out. The culmination of mentalism is realizing that the mind creates meaning before creating events. By adjusting meaning, events change. This lived understanding is gnosis, direct knowledge. Here, the foundation for all the other laws is established. Correspondence enters when you begin to read the world as a mirror. The practical application is emotionally challenging. Everything that irritates or attracts you reveals something internal. Instead of judging outwardly, you withdraw attention and ask, what in me responds to this? This question shifts perception and initiates realignment. Applying correspondence demands radical honesty. Repeated external patterns indicate unseen internal states. When you feel the emotion linked to the pattern without justification, aletheia occurs, the unveiling. Reality changes because the mirror no longer reflects the same content. In daily life, you use correspondence by observing relationships. Recurring conflicts point to inner fragmentation. By integrating it, henotes arises, inner unity. This unity manifests externally as clearer relationships or necessary separations. The emotional practice is to feel the impact of the mirror without defense. The ego tries to blame, but you remain present. This presence transforms reaction into understanding. The external world responds differently because you have changed the point of contact. Correspondence also applies to the body. Emotional symptoms indicate mental tensions. By listening to the body, you access pneuma, the conscious breath in motion. This listening reorganizes energy and action. When correspondence is applied consistently, internal coherence arises. Thought, emotion, and action align. The logos expresses itself as lived order. Reality reflects this order with less noise and greater fluidity. Depth increases when you realize that even resistances are mirrors. What you avoid shows where consciousness has not yet entered. When it enters, epistrophe occurs, a return to the center. Life simplifies without losing intensity. Applied correspondence dissolves social hypnosis because you stop reacting to collective narratives. Reality stops pushing you and begins to respond. This strengthens the observing consciousness and expands inner freedom. The cumulative effect is perceiving meaning where there was once chaos. This meaning is not imposed, it is revealed. Reality changes because you have learned to read it from essence, not from the mask. If, by applying mentalism and correspondence, your perception is already shifting now, the question that remains open, pulsing without allowing any closure, is this: what happens when you deepen this in the next principle, keeping the practice alive in daily life, and how far can your reality transform when every event becomes a mirror and every thought becomes an observed cause? The next field of mental alchemy is rhythm, because as long as you do not learn to feel the inner movement of consciousness, your soul continues to be dragged by emotional highs and lows as if they were destiny. Applying rhythm begins by recognizing that everything in you oscillates: motivation, faith, clarity, desire, and that the false identity suffers because it believes each oscillation is who you are. The practice is to perceive the movement without trying to correct it, feeling in the body the rise and the fall without reacting, because this observation breaks the spiritual blindness that keeps the ego in control. In daily practice, whenever you enter euphoria or emotional decline, you neither indulge nor resist, you simply observe. This point of observation creates stasis, conscious stillness within movement, and this changes everything emotionally because suffering comes from identification with the extreme. When you feel rhythm without merging with it, true identity begins to stabilize beyond oscillations. The ego hates this practice because it lives on peaks and collapses. By not feeding them, you withdraw energy from the matrix of psychological automatism. Emotionally, discomfort arises, a sensation of temporary emptiness. But it is precisely there that catharsis occurs, real purification of the mind. Reality begins to change because you stop making decisions at the height of excitement or despair. Applying rhythm means learning to wait. When something good happens, you appreciate it without clinging. When something bad arises, you sustain presence without dramatizing. This balance creates apatheia, inner sovereignty before the passions. Not coldness, but lucidity. Relationships improve because you no longer react impulsively, and opportunities arise because you stop sabotaging yourself at the extremes. The emotional training of rhythm takes place in the body. You feel tension rise, feel energy fall, and remain present. This remaining activates the nous, the silent intellect that perceives beyond thought. The mind organizes itself through the logos, and experience becomes clear. Reality changes because you stop fighting the flow and begin to navigate consciously. With rhythm applied, time changes in quality. You no longer live as a hostage to phases. Difficult periods cease to be threats and become process. This generates metanoia, a profound shift in perspective. External life responds with greater consistency because you no longer oscillate so intensely within. The practice deepens when you recognize that even spirituality has rhythm. Clarity comes and goes, silence appears and disappears. Accepting this prevents the creation of a new illusion of the spiritual self. The soul matures because it stops demanding permanent states. When rhythm is integrated, a stable base of consciousness emerges. You feel less anxiety about the future and less attachment to the past. This stability is pure alchemy, because it transforms suffering into understanding. Reality changes because you become internally predictable and externally free. Rhythm teaches that nothing needs to be forced. By respecting inner movement, you act at the right moment. This aligned action generates clearer results, less wear, and greater coherence with the telos, the essential purpose of being. From this stability, polarity enters, because now you have the internal structure not to flee from opposites. Applying polarity is recognizing that everything you reject in yourself continues to control you. Fear and courage, pain and pleasure, shadow and clarity are extremes of the same axis. Emotionally, the practice is to feel the negative pole without trying to eliminate it. In daily life, when anger, guilt, or fear arise, you neither identify nor repress. You perceive the degree of energy, and by remaining conscious, allow transmutation. This is inner alchemy, raising the degree of vibration without denying the existence of the opposite. The false identity loses strength because it lives from internal division. Applied polarity requires brutal honesty. You admit what you feel without justification. This recognition generates aletheia, the unveiling of what was hidden. Reality changes because repeated patterns begin to dissolve when opposites are integrated. Emotionally, integrating polarities hurts because the ego wants to choose sides. By not choosing, you access henotes, inner unity without fragmentation. This unity manifests externally as firmer decisions and clearer relationships. The concrete practice is simple and demanding. When something deeply bothers you in another person, you observe the reaction and ask where that same energy exists in you, not to blame yourself, but to integrate. This integration reduces projections and completely transforms the dynamics of relationships. Polarity also applies to success and failure. By not defining yourself by either, you act with greater freedom, external life responds with less self-sabotage and more continuity. This strengthens the observing consciousness and expands lucidity. When internal opposites are seen as degrees, chaos arises, inner light. It is not forced positivity, it is real clarity. You see the inner game unfolding and are no longer dragged by it. The psychological matrix begins to lose consistency. The integration of polarities reduces chronic internal conflicts. Energy once spent on inner struggle becomes energeia, the active potency of being. This energy manifests as coherent action, focus, and presence. Reality changes because you begin to act as a whole. Polarity teaches that there is no purity without integrated shadow. Accepting this dissolves defensive spirituality. The soul matures and real awakening deepens because it no longer depends on denying parts of yourself. With rhythm stabilized and polarity integrated, consciousness gains sufficient density and clarity to advance without collapse. The question that remains open without closing anything vibrating now is this: what happens to your reality when you apply this in the next principle, keeping this integration alive in every emotion that arises? And how far can this process go when you stop fleeing both the ascent and the descent? The next inevitable axis of mental alchemy is cause and effect, because as long as you do not perceive where what repeats in your life is born, the soul remains circling the same labyrinth, believing the world is unjust. Applying this principle begins at an emotionally uncomfortable point, abandoning the position of victim and assuming that every recurring pattern is sustained by an internal cause active right now, even if invisible. This perception wounds the ego but opens the first real tear in the veil of illusion. The direct practice is to observe repetitions without excuses, the same frustrations, the same conflicts, the same losses. Instead of seeking external explanations, you feel the emotional reaction that always arises alongside them and ask where this state already lives within you. This return inward is epistrophe, the movement back to the center of being, where true identity begins to reclaim authority. Applying cause and effect requires daily vigilance. Every decision made in impulse is seen as a seed. You feel the impulse in the body, recognize haste, fear, or lack, and choose not to act immediately. This interval creates stasis, a conscious pause, and changes the causal chain before the effect manifests. Reality changes because the cause was interrupted at its origin. Emotionally, this generates anxiety at first because the ego wants quick resolution. Sustaining the pause activates the nous, allowing perception to organize itself through the logos. From this order arises clarity about what to do, and, more importantly, about what not to do. Choices cease to be reactive and become coherent. Deep application happens when you observe thoughts as subtle causes. Repeated beliefs shape expectations, expectations shape actions, actions shape results. By seeing this chain in real time, aletheia occurs, the unveiling of inner mechanics. The psychological matrix loses its mystery, and with it, its power. To practice cause and effect is to accept responsibility without guilt. You do not accuse yourself, you understand. This understanding generates metanoia, a real change of perspective. External life begins to respond with fewer shocks because you no longer cast the same unconscious causes. Over time, you perceive that even emotions are causes. Resentment generates repetition, clarity generates openness. When you feel a dense emotion, you neither discharge nor repress it, you simply observe. This promotes catharsis, real purification, and alters the course of future events. This practice matures the soul because you stop waiting for external salvation. Each instant becomes a point of choice. This inner autonomy strengthens the observing consciousness and drastically reduces the feeling of being lost. When cause and effect integrate, coherence arises between intention and result. Life begins to make lived sense, not explained sense. And the question that remains alive is how far your reality can change when no unconscious cause goes unnoticed. With this foundation, the principle of gender enters, not as an abstract symbol, but as a practical dynamic of consciousness. To apply gender is to recognize the continuous interaction between receptivity and action within you. When one dominates, life jams. When both cooperate, reality flows. The practice begins by perceiving whether you are forcing or avoiding. Excess action is born of fear. Excess waiting is born of insecurity. Feeling this in the body is essential because the body reveals imbalance before the mind. By feeling it, you adjust your inner posture and allow pneuma to circulate. Applying gender is knowing when to be silent and when to act. Conscious silence generates clarity. Conscious action manifests. This cycle creates kinesis, aligned inner movement. Reality responds with synchronicity. Not because something external changed, but because you no longer block the flow. Emotionally, this requires trust. The ego wants constant control. When you relax control, fear arises. Remaining present within that fear allows integration. From this integration is born energeia, the active potency of being, which manifests without excessive effort. In daily life, you practice gender by listening before reacting, by allowing perception to mature before action. Decisions become more precise, words less destructive, movements more effective. External life begins to cooperate instead of resist. Applied gender also reveals creativity. Ideas arise when there is inner space. Correct action arises when there is clarity. This balance transforms work, relationships, and choices. Everything gains its own rhythm without collapse. When receptivity and action align, henotes arises inner unity. There is no division between feeling and doing. This unity reduces wear and increases presence. The false identity loses ground because it lives on extremes. Over time, you perceive that forcing results creates blockage. Allowing the process creates openness. This perception changes the relationship with time and expectation. Reality ceases to appear as an enemy. The mature practice of gender generates active serenity. You act when it is time and rest when it is necessary. This conscious alternation stabilizes the mind and deepens real awakening. And if now you feel that the way you act, wait, and decide is already beginning to reorganize from within, the question that remains open without closing anything is this: what happens to your reality when this balance begins to guide each ordinary choice of the day, and how far can this flow take you when you stop fighting against it? The field that now opens is that of vibration, because as long as you do not perceive that everything you live is an inner movement of consciousness, the soul continues to believe that reality happens to it, when in truth it is traversed by continuous vibratory states. Applying vibration begins with feeling, not thinking, because every emotion, every thought, and every impulse carries its own rhythm that shapes your experience. In practice, you learn to sense the inner state before acting, recognizing whether it is dense, contracted, scattered, or clear, and this direct reading already changes your relationship with the present moment. The emotional application of vibration demands bodily presence because the body reveals frequency before the mind justifies. Tension, acceleration, apathy, or lightness are not details. They are precise indicators of the state of consciousness. When you feel this without judgment, the ego loses its ability to deceive you with narratives. This perception generates gnosis, direct knowledge, and begins to dissolve the false identity that lives from automatism. To practice vibration is to learn not to feed dense states with repetitive thought. When anxiety or anger arises, you feel the inner movement and refuse to narrate it mentally. This refusal is not repression, it is conscious observation. By sustaining this presence, catharsis occurs, natural purification, and the state begins to transform by itself. Reality changes because you no longer sustain the same frequency for long periods. Vibration rises not through artificial positivity, but through clarity. By bringing full attention to the breath, the body, and the now, you stabilize inner movement. This stabilization creates stasis, conscious stillness, which reorganizes emotional flow. Decisions made from this state produce completely different effects, more coherent and less destructive. Applying vibration also means choosing what you consume mentally. Words, images, and environments modulate inner states. By perceiving how certain stimuli densify you, you learn to step away consciously. This choice is not moral, it is energetic. The matrix of social hypnosis loses strength when you stop vibrating at the same collective pattern. Over time, you realize that inner states create fields of attraction, not in a naive magical sense, but psychological and existential. When you sustain clarity, more coherent encounters arise. When you sustain confusion, conflicts repeat. This reading radically changes your responsibility for your own reality. The deep practice of vibration happens in silence. By entering inner silence, you feel the subtle movement of consciousness without interference. From this silence emerges Thoth, the light of lucidity, which does not depend on positive emotion. This light reorganizes perception and dissolves spiritual blindness. Integrated vibration generates inner refinement. You become sensitive to your own states before they turn into actions. This refinement is real inner alchemy because it transforms raw psychic material into clear consciousness. External life responds with less chaos because you no longer emit the same inner noise. When vibration is understood, you stop trying to change the world directly. You change the state and the world responds. This lived understanding marks a leap in real awakening because you stop fighting symptoms and begin to act at the root of experience. The continuous application of vibration requires emotional discipline because the ego wants to justify low states. You learn not to identify with them. By not identifying, they lose duration. This profoundly changes the relationship with suffering and pleasure, which cease to define who you are. In daily life, applying vibration means perceiving the inner tone before speaking, acting, or deciding. A word spoken from a dense state creates dense effects. The same word spoken from clarity creates openness. This difference is felt immediately in relationships and in practical results. The practice deepens when you recognize micro variations within throughout the day, small irritations, small drops in attention. By noticing and correcting them through a return to presence, you prevent them from becoming major effects. This creates a more stable and conscious life. Vibration also applies to work and creation. Acting under inner pressure generates wear, Acting from presence generates flow. By sensing when to stop and when to continue, you preserve energy and expand effectiveness. This efficiency does not come from effort, but from inner alignment. Over time, you realize that elevated states do not need to be artificially maintained. It is enough not to fall so far. This vibratory sobriety creates spiritual maturity. The soul stops seeking peaks and begins to inhabit continuous clarity. The mature practice of vibration dissolves the compulsive search for experiences. You begin to value lucidity. This lucidity manifests as active calm, focus, and discernment. External reality reorganizes itself because you no longer lose yourself in extremes. When vibration is integrated with the other principles already lived, total coherence arises. Mind, emotion, and action vibrate on the same axis. This generates henotes, inner unity. From this unity is born silent strength, not displayed, but effective. This strength changes the way you walk through the world. Less reactivity, more precision. Less escape, more presence. Life ceases to feel chaotic and begins to feel legible, not because it became easy, but because it became clear. Conscious vibration also reveals when something is not aligned. Discomforts become signals, not enemies. By listening to them, you adjust course before collapse. This refined listening transforms crises into gentle corrections. With this practice, psychological time changes. You no longer live behind yourself. Decisions happen at the right moment. This inner synchronicity reflects externally as encounters, opportunities, and natural closures. And if now you perceive that your inner state is no longer something random, but a field that can be observed, refined, and directed, the question that remains open, pulsing without allowing closure, is this: what happens to your reality when you sustain this vibratory vigilance in every ordinary gesture of the day, and how far can this refinement take you when you do not abandon the practice in the next instant? When you truly begin to practice the 7 laws, the first thing that dies is naivety. You stop believing that personal life, work, money, relationships, and crises are separate areas because you realize they all obey the same inner mechanisms, and this is violent to the ego since it loses its last excuse to keep sleeping while life happens without you. At work, for example, mentalism forces you to face something almost no one accepts. The environment is not sabotaging you. You vibrate in states that create friction or flow. When you walk into a meeting carrying haste, fear, or resentment, the outcome is already determined before you open your mouth. And applying the law here means arriving present, sensing the inner state, adjusting before acting, and seeing how reality responds differently. In your relationship with money, cause and effect cuts through the fantasy of chance. Impulsive spending, fear of scarcity, and poor decisions do not arise out of nowhere. They are extensions of repeated mental states. When you observe the impulse before acting, hold your hand back, feel the anxiety, and do not obey it, you alter the entire causal chain, and over time the financial flow changes because the internal cause changed. In relationships, correspondence is relentless. Everything that wounds you in the other reveals something unintegrated within you, and fleeing from this only prolongs the pattern. When you stop arguing and begin to observe the emotional impact inside the body, the dynamic changes because you stop feeding the same relational frequency that always creates the same type of bond. In conflicts, polarity is the most ignored weapon. While you fight to prove you are right, you remain trapped in the pole. When you sustain presence and perceive that the opposite lives within you, the conflict loses force. This does not make you passive, it makes you precise. And people feel that precision without you raising your voice. In emotional crises, rhythm prevents collapse. You understand that the fall is not failure, it is movement. By not identifying with the bottom of the pit, you prevent destructive decisions. The practice is not making definitive choices at the peak or in the abyss, and that alone already changes the course of years of life. In daily stress, vibration shows that it is not the event that destroys you, but the sustained state. By perceiving the contracted body, the accelerated mind, and adjusting before it becomes reaction, you avoid explosions, regrets, and accumulated wear. External reality becomes lighter because you no longer carry unnecessary weight. In decision-making, gender enters like a sharpened blade. Acting without listening creates error. Waiting without acting creates stagnation. When you sense internally the exact moment to act, the decision feels simple and inevitable. This changes careers, changes trajectories, changes destinies that once seemed confused. In the use of time, all the laws unite. Procrastination is not laziness, it is unobserved internal conflict. By bringing presence to the discomfort of beginning, you dissolve resistance. Tasks flow because you no longer fight the internal state that was blocking them. In emotional health, the practice prevents the accumulation of psychic waste. Emotions felt in the moment do not become symptoms later. By neither swallowing nor discharging but observing, real purification occurs. The body responds because it stops carrying unresolved conflicts. In social chaos, applying the laws removes you from collective hypnosis. News, opinions, and narratives stop emotionally hijacking you. You observe the impact, feel the state, and choose not to react mechanically. This creates inner sovereignty amid external confusion. In loneliness, the laws reveal something brutal. Emptiness is not absence, it is uninhabited space. By remaining present without escape, loneliness transforms into clarity. From that clarity arise more aligned choices, including whom to be with and whom not to be with. In fear of the future, mentalism and vibration act together. Projections are mental states extended through time. By returning to the now, the future loses emotional power. You act better today, and this concretely changes tomorrow. In regret about the past, cause and effect brings lucidity without guilt. You see where you were unconscious, you learn, and you do not repeat. The past stops pulling you because it becomes information, not identity. In spiritual fatigue, rhythm saves you. You stop demanding constant elevated states. You accept oscillations without abandoning the practice. This continuity without drama is what sustains real transformation. In anger, polarity transforms poison into energy. By feeling the force without discharging it, it refines into firm action. You begin to position yourself better, not explode worse. In creativity, vibration and gender release flow. Ideas arise when there is inner space. Execution happens when there is clear decision. Projects move forward because you no longer sabotage yourself internally. In self-discipline, the laws eliminate brute force. You do not coerce yourself, you observe resistance and pass through it. This creates consistency without internal violence. In identity, all the laws together dismantle the mask. You realize you are not the reacting character, but the space that observes. This perception changes everything because the world stops defining who you are. In life as a whole, the effect is cumulative. Small internal adjustments produce large external changes. There is no magical event. There is sustained coherence. Reality reorganizes itself because you stopped feeding it unconsciously. And now that you see that all areas of your life obey the same laws, that there is no neutral situation and no wasted moment, the question that remains open, burning, with no possible closure is this: what happens when you decide to apply this to absolutely everything? Without exception, without pause, without returning to the automatic? And how far can your reality be taken when you stop living as effect and begin to live as conscious cause? When you understand that there is no neutral situation, the practice of the 7 laws stops being spirituality and becomes inner governance. Everything that happens is a field of application, and ignoring this is choosing to remain ruled by unconscious forces. Reality begins to change when you stop asking life to be different and start operating as someone who knows the gears from the inside. The moment something goes wrong, mentalism demands an immediate response. Do not ask, why me? Ask, what mental state am I sustaining right now? This short question already interrupts automatism. By feeling the state before acting, you avoid foolish decisions made under tension, and this alone alters entire trajectories that were previously destroyed by impulses lasting seconds. When people provoke you, correspondence enters like a blade. It is not about what they do, it is about what it touches in you. By observing the internal reaction instead of attacking externally, you reclaim power. Conflicts stop escalating because you no longer offer the same emotional point of contact that used to feed the fight. In moments of victory, rhythm prevents the future fall. You do not intoxicate yourself with the peak, you remain lucid. This sobriety avoids arrogance, excesses, and mistakes that usually come right after success. The practice here is simple and hard: to feel pleasure without identifying with it. In moments of loss, the same rhythm saves you from collapse. By knowing that dissent is part of movement, you neither dramatize nor make definitive decisions. You wait. This conscious waiting preserves life structures that would be destroyed if you reacted from the bottom of the pit. When hatred, envy, or guilt arise, polarity demands brutal maturity. You do not try to be good, you integrate the energy, you feel the force without discharging it. When refined, this energy becomes positioning, clarity, and courage. Whoever does not integrate becomes a slave to their own shadow. In the fear of acting, polarity also operates. Fear and courage are the same axis. By feeling fear without fleeing, you already move toward the other pole. Correct action is born there, not from empty self-affirmation. This changes careers, relationships, and choices that were stuck for years. When patterns repeat, cause and effect cuts through all illusion. If something returns, it is because the cause still lives in you. By identifying the state that always precedes the same outcome, you find the exact point of intervention. Changing it there changes everything afterward. In important decisions, you do not analyze only external scenarios. You observe the internal state that wants to decide too quickly or postpone indefinitely. By not obeying that state, you alter the causal chain. Choices cease to be emotional reactions and become conscious movements. When everything seems stuck, gender shows the error. Either you are forcing too much or waiting too much. By balancing action and receptivity, things unlock. The practice is to feel when to act and when to remain silent. This fine adjustment completely changes the flow of life. In the creation of projects, gender and vibration work together. Ideas arise when there is inner space. Execution happens when there is firm decision. Without this balance, projects die. With it, they advance without excessive wear. When the day begins heavy, vibration is the first point of intervention. You do not try to think positive. You regulate the state, breath, posture, attention. By changing the inner tone, the entire day responds differently. Identical events produce different effects because you are no longer vibrating in the same place. In toxic environments, vibration protects you. You feel when you are being drained and adjust presence. You do not enter emotional games. This preserves energy and clarity. Over time, these environments lose power over you or dissolve from your life. In the use of social media, news, and conversations, the laws prevent contamination. You perceive the internal impact before reacting. You choose not to drown in collective narratives. This creates mental sovereignty in a hysterical world. In daily discipline, the 7 laws together eliminate brute force. You do not coerce yourself, you regulate, you observe resistance and pass through it without violence. Consistency arises because there is no internal war. In anxiety, mentalism and vibration dissolve projections. You return to the now, the future loses weight, decisions improve, the body relaxes. External reality organizes itself because you are no longer acting from anticipated panic. In guilt, cause and effect brings lucidity without punishment. You learn, adjust, and move on. Chronic guilt dies because it loses its function. Life moves forward because you are no longer trapped in past error. In silence, all the laws settle. You realize you do not need to control anything. Only observe and adjust. From this silence arise precise actions. Life responds with less resistance. When someone tries to dominate you emotionally, the practice makes you unreachable. You do not react, do not explain, do not justify, you maintain presence. The game dies from lack of response. This changes all dynamics that once seemed inevitable. When nothing seems to work, you do not abandon the practice. You remain. This remaining is the true cut with mechanical life. Those who remain cross through, those who flee repeat. And now that you see there is no area of life outside the laws, that everything can be governed, observed, and adjusted, the question that remains open, burning with no possible closure is this: what happens to your existence when you stop applying this only when you remember and begin to live as someone who governs each instant consciously? And how far can reality bend when you no longer surrender control to the automatic, not even for a second? When you take the 7 laws to the rawest level of life, you discover something no one warned you about. There is no personal life separate from spiritual life. There is only applied consciousness or absent consciousness. And every time consciousness is absent, the laws continue operating, only against you. The practice begins when you accept that everything you live is being governed right now, even when you pretend not to see it. In identity, the application is brutal. You realize that the self that takes offense, justifies itself, and defends itself is merely a mechanical effect. Using mentalism, you observe this character arising as thought and emotion, not as truth. By not confusing yourself with it, identity loosens. This changes your entire life because decisions stop being made to protect a mask and begin to serve a real inner axis. In the family, where triggers are old and deep, correspondence and polarity become relentless. Everything that knocks you off balance there reveals unintegrated conditioning. The practice is not to argue or to impulsively distance yourself, but to observe the internal impact and not react in the old pattern. When you sustain presence, the entire system changes because you step out of the predictable role that kept the game running. In love life, the laws expose illusions without mercy. Attraction is not chance. It is compatible vibration. You learn to feel the inner state you are seeking in the other and realize you are trying to resolve in someone else what you had not integrated in yourself. By regulating the state, the type of relationship changes. Toxic relationships lose attraction, more conscious relationships become possible. In sex, vibration and gender show whether you are using the other for discharge or for presence. When consciousness is absent, emptiness grows afterward. When there is presence, integration occurs. The practice is to feel the state before, during, and after without fantasy. This profoundly changes the relationship with pleasure, bonding, and vital energy. With money, cause and effect is merciless. You see clearly that scarcity does not begin in the wallet, it begins in the state. Financial decisions made under fear generate more fear. The practice is to feel the impulse before spending, investing, or avoiding. By not acting from anxiety, the financial pattern begins to reorganize slowly but solidly. At work, mentalism and rhythm change everything. You perceive when you are working from tension, competition, or comparison. By adjusting the state before producing, quality changes. Opportunities arise not because you force them, but because you began operating with clarity. Errors decrease, conflicts reduce, Recognition appears as a consequence. In leadership, the laws become visible. People respond to your state, not to your speech. When you govern yourself, you influence effortlessly. When you are fragmented, you lose authority. The practice is simple and hard. Regulate your own state before trying to lead anyone else. In decision-making, the 7 laws unite. You feel the state, observe the rhythm, recognize polarities, identify causes, and only then act. This eliminates impulsive decisions and chronic postponement. Life begins to move forward with less regret because choices are born from presence. In anxiety, mentalism and vibration are surgical. You see that anxiety is an imagined future loaded with emotion. By returning to the body and the now, the future loses power. Decisions improve, sleep improves, the body responds. Reality changes because you are no longer living in a time that does not exist. In depression, rhythm and cause and effect bring lucidity without romanticizing. You understand that there is a descent, but you do not identify with it. You do not make final decisions at the bottom. You sustain minimal presence. This prevents self-sabotage and preserves life structures until the movement changes. In anger, polarity transforms destruction into strength. You feel the energy without discharging it. From this containment arise firm action, clear boundaries, positioning. Conflicts diminish because you neither explode nor erase yourself. In guilt, cause and effect cuts the theater. You learn, adjust, and move on. Guilt loses its function. Life moves forward because you are no longer trapped in the past. In spirituality, the laws destroy fantasy. There is no escape, no permanent illumination. There is daily practice. By accepting this, you mature. Awakening stops being a search and becomes functionality. In the use of time, all the laws operate. You see where you are losing yourself, where you are avoiding, where you are forcing. By adjusting, the day yields more without wear. Productivity arises without internal violence. In emotional illness, the practice prevents accumulation. Emotions that are felt do not become chronic symptoms. The body responds because it no longer carries unseen conflicts. In society, the laws free you from collective hysteria. You observe narratives without drowning in them. This creates stability in an unstable world. In loneliness, you learn to inhabit it. It stops being a threat and becomes space. Choices change because you no longer accept anything just to avoid being alone. In symbolic death, when something ends, rhythm and correspondence prevent attachment. You let go, new cycles arise without needing to destroy the old by force. And when all of this begins to operate simultaneously, life changes not through an external event but through constant inner governance. You stop being pushed and begin to steer. You do not control the world, but you control the point of contact with it. And the question that remains open, with no possible closure, is this. What happens to an entire existence when no area is left outside consciousness, when no reaction goes unnoticed, and when you decide to live as one who knows the laws that govern everything, including yourself? When the paradigm shock happens, you realize something that collapses years of illusion. It is not life that tests you, it is you who are revealed in every test. The 7 laws do not appear to save you, they appear to expose where you still live on automatic, and this exposure hurts because it dismantles the comfortable narrative that you already know. Real practice begins when you accept that knowing without applying is just another elegant mask of the ego. In identity, the impact is devastating. You discover that almost everything you defend is conditioned reaction. Using mentalism, you see thoughts arising as programs, not as truths. By not obeying automatically, the sense of who am I wavers, and this instability is the beginning of freedom. Reality changes because decisions stop serving a character and begin serving consciousness. In the family, the shock is greater because the field is old. Correspondence reveals that you occupy inherited roles, not chosen ones. The practice is to sustain presence when they try to pull you into the familiar drama. By not reacting, you break invisible pacts. The entire system reconfigures because you stepped out of the predictable place that sustained conflict. In love, the laws expose the central lie. You do not fall in love with people, you fall in love with states. Vibration shows why certain relationships addict and others do not sustain. By regulating the inner state, attraction changes. This is frightening because you realize you were choosing from lack, not from clarity. Affective reality changes because the criterion changed. In sex, the shock is realizing that pleasure without presence charges interest. Gender reveals when there is real exchange and when there is use. The practice is to feel the afterward, not only the during. When there is presence, integration. When there is escape, emptiness. This irreversibly transforms the relationship with the body, desire, and bonding. With money, the paradigm collapses when you see that winning and losing follow repeated internal states. Cause and effect does not forgive self-deception. The practice is to observe microscopic decisions, purchases, postponements, risks, and feel the state that motivates them. By not acting from fear, the pattern changes, not quickly, but definitively. At work, the shock is realizing that competence without state becomes wear. Mentalism and vibration show that producing under tension generates hidden conflict. The practice is to adjust the state before producing. Quality rises, errors fall, recognition appears, not as a prize but as a consequence. In leadership, illusion falls when you realize no one follows discourse, they follow coherence. Rhythm and polarity show when you are forcing authority or erasing yourself. By integrating firmness and listening, influence arises without effort. Environments change because you change the axis. In decision-making, the paradigm breaks when you realize doubt is not lack of information, it is internal conflict. Applying the laws is feeling the state that wants to decide quickly or flee. By not obeying, the decision matures, less regret, more alignment. Life advances with lower cost. In anxiety, the shock is understanding it is a future fabricated now. Mentalism cuts projection. Vibration regulates the body. The practice is returning to the present repeatedly. The future loses power. The body responds. Choices improve. Reality organizes itself because you stepped out of imaginary time. In depression, the paradigm changes when you understand it is not identity, it is a phase. Rhythm prevents final decisions at the bottom. The practice is minimal presence and continuity. This preserves vital structures until the ascent. Life does not collapse because you do not collaborate with collapse. In anger, the paradigm shift is realizing it is raw energy. Polarity teaches refinement, not discharge. The practice is to feel the force without exploding. From this containment arises clear positioning. Conflicts cease because you do not lose yourself. In guilt, cause and effect kills the theater. Learning replaces punishment. The practice is correcting the cause and moving on. The past loses power. Life moves because you stopped whipping yourself. In spirituality, the shock is discovering that escape is also ego. There is no final state, there is daily practice. Accepting this matures you. Awakening becomes functional, not performative. Reality changes because you no longer live from peaks. With time, the laws reveal invisible waste. Procrastination is unseen resistance. The practice is crossing the initial discomfort. The day yields more, wear decreases, results grow without internal violence. In emotional health, the paradigm falls when you realize that feeling in the moment prevents illness later. Observing without repressing purifies. The body responds. Life becomes lighter because there is no accumulation. In society, the laws remove you from hysteria. You observe narratives without drowning. This creates rare stability. Decisions become clearer. You do not become the mass. In loneliness, the shock is realizing it reveals dependencies. By inhabiting it, choices become honest. Relationships change because they are no longer used as anesthesia. In loss, rhythm and correspondence teach letting go without destruction. Cycles close, new ones open. Life continues without resentment. In creation, vibration and gender align idea and execution. Projects flow, sabotage drops. Reality responds because you stop dividing yourself. And when all of this operates at once, the final paradigm falls. There is no life outside the laws. There is applied consciousness or its absence. You do not control the world, you control the point of contact. And the shock that remains open without anesthesia is this: what remains of your life when no excuse survives, when every area is governed consciously, and when you decide to live as one who knows that everything responds to the state you sustain now? When the paradigm finally collapses, you realize there is no rest outside consciousness. The 7 laws keep operating while you are awake but asleep, and it is precisely there that they govern you under the table. Applying this in an adult way is accepting that every automatic reaction is a vote cast for the old world, and every conscious pause is a direct blow against the mechanics that have always controlled you. In daily routine, the shock is understanding that habits are not neutral. Waking up late, eating impulsively, replying to messages without presence are unconscious magical acts. Mentalism and cause and effect operate there, accumulating results. When you begin the day by regulating your state before acting, the entire day reorganizes itself because the cause was adjusted before the effect took form. In the use of the body, the laws expose the modern lie. You do not have a body, you operate through it. Vibration and rhythm show that exhaustion comes from sustained states, not only from effort. By listening to signals early and adjusting, you avoid collapse. The body responds with energy because it is no longer ignored as a sacred instrument. In eating, the paradigm breaks when you realize that eating is vibrating. Anxious states demand excess, clear states ask for simplicity. By feeling the impulse before ingesting, you choose. Digestion improves, the mind clears, life gains rhythm because the body stopped carrying unseen conflict. In sleep, the laws show the price of unconsciousness. Going to bed loaded with noise keeps the mind spinning. The practice is to discharge before lying down, feel the body, silence narratives. Sleep deepens, dreams change, the next day is born different because the mind was purified at the right point. In communication, the shock is realizing that words are vectors of state. Saying the right thing from the wrong state creates disaster. By feeling before speaking, you change the impact. Conflicts evaporate, agreements arise because vibration precedes content. In conflict management, the laws become clean weapons. You do not enter to win, you enter to regulate. Polarity and rhythm prevent escalation. You sustain presence while the other loses balance. The conflict dies from lack of emotional fuel. In personal authority, the paradigm collapses when you understand that respect is born from coherence, not imposition. Regulating your state before leading changes everything. People feel when there is an axis. Decisions flow because the inner field is stable. In learning, the laws show that accumulation is not integration. Studying in a scattered state does not anchor. Studying in presence transfigures. Fewer hours yield more because the mind is ordered by the right principle. In creativity, the shock is accepting that blockage is state, not lack of talent. Vibration and gender unlock it. You create space, then you act. Projects advance because the mind stopped fighting itself. In risk management, cause and effect cuts impulses. You feel excitement and fear before deciding, you do not obey, you choose. Losses decrease because decisions are not born from the peak or from panic. In relation to status, the laws unmask vanity. Seeking recognition vibrates lack, regulating the state restores focus. Results come as consequence, not as objective. Life becomes cleaner. In comparison, the shock is realizing it steals vital energy. Mentalism reveals the trick. You return to your own axis. Productivity rises because the mind stopped dividing itself. In time management, the paradigm falls when you see that hurry is a state. Rhythm teaches acting at the right time. Delays and collisions decrease because you are no longer forcing the flow. In self-discipline, the laws replace violence with lucidity. Observing resistance dissolves half of it. Consistency arises without a whip. Body and mind cooperate. In self-confidence, the shock is understanding it is born from repeated presence. Fulfilling small inner commitments strengthens the axis. Life responds because you became predictable to yourself. In intuition, the laws clean noise. Silence reveals practical signals. Decisions hit the mark because they are not contaminated by fear. Reality seems to help because you stopped interfering. In adversity, the final paradigm falls. The problem is not an enemy, it is feedback. By reading the signal early, you adjust course. Crises shorten. Learning accelerates. In emotional maturity, the laws end spiritual childhood. There is no savior, there is practice. You assume inner governance. Life changes because someone finally took the wheel. In freedom, the maximum shock, it is not doing whatever you want, it is not being forced by states. When you govern the state, you govern action. When you govern action, you govern effects. The world responds because you change the point of contact. And when this becomes continuous, the question that burns and does not close is this. If absolutely everything responds to the state you sustain, what remains of your life when you decide to no longer hand over a single instant to the automatic? And how far can this reality go when every choice is born of full consciousness, without exception, without return, without excuse? When you understand that there is no neutral situation, the practice of the 7 laws ceases to be spirituality and becomes inner governance. Everything that happens is a field of application, and ignoring this is choosing to continue being ruled by unconscious forces. Reality begins to change when you stop asking life to be different and start operating as someone who knows the gears from the inside. The moment something goes wrong, mentalism demands an immediate response. Do not ask why me, ask what mental state am I sustaining right now? This short question already interrupts automatism. By feeling the state before acting, you avoid foolish decisions made under tension, and this alone alters entire trajectories that were once destroyed by impulses lasting seconds. When people provoke you, correspondence enters like a blade. It is not about what they do, it is about what it touches in you. By observing the internal reaction instead of attacking externally, you reclaim power. Conflicts stop escalating because you no longer offer the same emotional point of contact that fed the fight. In moments of victory, rhythm prevents the future fall. You do not intoxicate yourself with the peak, you remain lucid. This sobriety avoids arrogance, excess, and mistakes that usually come right after success. The practice here is simple and hard, feeling pleasure without identifying with it. In moments of loss, the same rhythm saves you from collapse. By knowing that descent is part of movement, you do not dramatize or make definitive decisions. You wait. This conscious waiting preserves life structures that would be destroyed if you reacted from the bottom of the pit. When hatred, envy, or guilt arise, polarity demands brutal maturity. You do not try to be good, you integrate the energy. You feel the force without discharging it. When refined, this energy becomes positioning, clarity, and courage. Those who do not integrate become slaves to their own shadow. In fear of acting, polarity also operates. Fear and courage are the same axis. By feeling fear without fleeing, you already move toward the other pole. Correct action is born there, not from empty self-affirmation. This changes careers, relationships, and choices that were stuck for years. When patterns repeat, cause and effect cuts through all illusion. If something returns, it is because the cause still lives in you. By identifying the state that always precedes the same result, you find the exact point of intervention. Changing it there changes everything afterward. In important decisions, you do not analyze only external scenarios, you observe the internal state that wants to decide too quickly or postpone indefinitely. By not obeying that state, you alter the causal chain. Choices stop being emotional reactions and become conscious movements. When everything seems stuck, gender shows the error. Either you are forcing too much or waiting too much. By balancing action and receptivity, things unlock. The practice is feeling when to act and when to remain silent. This fine adjustment completely changes the flow of life. If you made it this far, it was not curiosity, it was resonance. This is not content for entertainment, it is applied mental alchemy, and the more you listen, the more your inner reality reorganizes itself, because what was activated is not information, it is a living process. Continue listening until the end to keep the field active and allow the mind to finish recalibrating. Subscribe to the channel if you feel this type of teaching is uncommon, because it is not made for the masses, it is for those ready to leave mechanical life. Become a member to access even denser, more direct, uncompromising content, where mental alchemy is not softened or diluted. Comment on what changed in your perception during the video. What he does, writing anchors the process and prevents the ego from erasing the impact. Nothing here ends. Either you keep applying it or everything returns to the automatic. The choice happens now.